things real estate, from the investing to being a broker to loan and all. And today we have our first guest, Gabby Ariza. And so we're going to kind of give a little background, learn a little bit from her story, and as time goes on. But first and foremost, I wanted to give her a chance to introduce herself, tell us about her journey, how she's come to be an investor in real estate, see what some of the lessons we can learn. And as we continue in further episodes, when she comes back on, we're going to learn more from that, build on that, and grow from there. So, Gabby, thank you so much for joining. And please tell me a little bit about yourself. I'd love to hear.
Thanks for inviting me. So, my background comes from really the tech industry. Really, I was a web developer and then transitioned into cybersecurity. And along the way, I started dabbling in real estate. The way I started in real estate was through house hacking. I said I was going to buy a house, didn't know what I was doing. I was like, this house is a little bit too big for me. So I'm going to start renting out the rooms, renting out different things. And that's kind of how the journey really started. And then I really enjoyed it after that.
So it sounds like the American dream got you hooked, and then all of a sudden you wanted to sort of grow into it, learn more, see how you can kind of stick a hold into the economy and build your portfolio unintentionally along the way as well.
Yeah, for sure. When you hear about the American dream, you're like, okay, well, I got I have my career already. What's the next step? Buying a house, I guess.
Oh, I want to take a step back real quick. Like say, as far as maybe your parents go, what was their influence like on you, kind of going into real estate and purchasing a home, all of that?
Yeah, so my parents immigrated to the US. My mom came from Guatemala and my dad came from Colombia, and they were always in the mindset of how can we grow our wealth? And that's where they started in real estate. They started acquiring properties. They did it a little bit different than I did. They focused more on commercial properties. But from there, they really leveraged their business and their W-2 and be able to scale from there. And so watching that growing up, I was like, wow, I didn't realize the power of real estate or everything that it provided us. And when I was an adult, I didn't really think about it much. But then when I started getting into the house hacking and acquiring real estate, I realized that my parents had such a good idea in terms of investing in real estate. And what's mostly interesting is that they didn't learn it from anybody else because their parents came from poverty. I mean, they also came from poverty. And then they came out here and then they started investing. And that really changed really like the wealth in the family and stuff.
So basically, they fought from adversity, grew into it, and then, like you mentioned earlier, getting hooked by the American dream of how can we change this? How can we create something generational? How can we build something different based on what we've experienced in the past? And then how can we grow from there? And then you sort of took on the baton, kind of saw the possibilities, and then kind of move forward. So then I want to kind of ask, what was that experience like when you took on that first challenge of house hacking for the first time? How did you get into that, and what was it like?
Well, first, I was really shopping for a house for myself, but at the same time, I felt like the houses were way too big for just me. So that's where I kind of started thinking about the house hacking process before I even made an offer on a property. I said, okay, how can I find a house that kind of works for me, but also be able to have some type of roommate or live with somebody and be able to help with the house payment and also just with the space because I didn't want to be by myself in a huge house. And when I started shopping for properties, I took a look at the layout and how kind of the design of the house to see if I could eventually come to a spot where I could split the house in two or I could have a little bit more privacy. And so when I was house shopping, that's what I started looking for and then placed my offer. I actually had to put in a lot of offers. I didn't get the first few ones.
Yeah, I struck out the
And
park first time around.
yeah, so it definitely took me about like 8 months, I want to say. But finally, when I closed on the property, I had my roommate ready to go and pretty much was going to rent out the garage right after as well.
So a couple of things I heard from you there is that first you had a buy box that you were working with. You knew exactly what kind of structure you wanted, what would be the perfect and ideal property for you because you already had an idea, you have an idea where you were going with it. You wanted to be a big house, but you knew you'd have a roommate with it. So you knew it'd be income generating in that sense. You knew exactly how you'd maybe put a little bit of work into it to maybe make it even more ideal. But at least you knew what sort of structure you would need to go into. So that way you can kind of just get that first step going into it. And then, as you said, it's never easy. It's not just like the first offer you put in gets accepted and boom, you're a homeowner. It takes several tries, several months in this case. And then by that point, you're giving you at least a chance to get everything you need to be prepared. And then soon as you offer's accepted, roommate's ready, good to go, and you can move right in.
Exactly. Yep.
So how was it the first time you had a roommate and you became a landlord? What was that like? What were the experiences or challenges in that moment?
Honestly, I had no idea what I was doing. I have to say that I did not vet my um, roommate. Happened to just work with him, and he was like, "Yeah, I need a place to live." And I'm like, "Well, I know you have a job because we work together. Um,
Check.
how about I rent you this spot?" And so he was like, "Sure." So I would definitely do it way different now. I have a vetting process now that's much different, but it worked well because he was really cool to hang out with. So it was nice to have somebody else in the house. And then he had a place that was less expensive than other rentals in the area.
Okay. Okay. So you're able to like, give him a kind of a reduced cost of living, basically find value for the both of you. You and getting a tenant, getting that income right away, and him being able to reduce the home cost that he already had. So that way it's creating a win-win situation for everybody involved. So it's mutually beneficial for you guys.
Yeah, and it was even more beneficial because the other thing that I was doing when I was house shopping was I didn't want to be too far away from my job. And so this house was only, it was less than a 10-minute drive to our job. So that also worked for him because
Gotcha.
it was a close
Right.
commute. But at the same time, it was also close to the train station with the express line into Chicago, which is perfect because if I ever started moving up in the corporate ladder, I had access to the train station where I could get to downtown really easily.
Okay. So that's another big thing for you that's probably part of your buy box was the location for the property and then something
Yep.
that fit that particular style that you were looking for as well. And then for the convenience of finding a tenant who's similarly close in proximity to work like you, that just kind of doubled everything for you guys.
Exactly. Yep.
And you mentioned the being close to a train station. Yeah, when we spoke off camera, you mentioned that a mentor of yours that told you kind of giving you an insight into what that's like when you're living or having a property close to train station, some of the value that comes from that. Do you mention a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, so I had actually another coworker who had a piece of land actually by another train station on the same line. And pretty much what he did was he put a bunch of gravel down and then he just started renting out all the spots. And because it was close to the train station where people needed to commute to Chicago, people would just park, they would pay every month. And right there, he was generating income without really dealing with typical tenants.
Right.
And so that kind of sparked my idea of, well, I have this garage and I only had one car. So I decided to start renting out that garage because, again, the proximity to the train station and also not every house had a garage. So I started attracting people who just had like a classic car. And so they just wanted to store the car. And that was easy money as well because they're just paying monthly and it's not a typical tenant.
Right. So you don't have to deal with the headache of, hey, this isn't working, that isn't working. It's just a case of put your car here, here's a garage opener, hands free.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. I want to ask, how did you find people to be able to rent out your garage?
I actually posted it on Craigslist, and that was because of the idea that my coworker had as well. And I had been looking on Craigslist to find other different things, and I stumbled upon a lot of garage listings. So I'm like, okay, well, that's an opportunity to be able to market. And every time I would post, I'd get inquiries right away, pretty much.
So it seems like it was able to give you that quick turnaround for finding people. That was a hot spot for, okay, need here, Craigslist answers that solution right away. Okay, okay. So that's a good niche to know. It's like simple things like that where people wouldn't ordinarily think that, hey, I can use my garage as a loaner spot, or hey, there's this spot on the line that I can use next to this. So whether it's a train station, whether it's a school, whether it's a college campus, just the idea to looking at land a little bit more differently based on proximity to what's around them. And then the value you can generate from that too is something that really speaks key to having that kind of relationship where you learn from other people who are investing as well.
Yeah, it sure does. And it really put into perspective, like, okay, what do I have in the house that I can really use to my advantage? Because I've seen some creative things where people may rent out their garage, but it's not even to a classic car. Maybe somebody just needs to store a bunch of things. And so they just store it in their garage and they just pay them. Same thing with a basement. Sometimes people have like all this space in the basement and they don't have that much stuff, so they can rent that to somebody else. Same thing with attic space. So I've seen a lot of like creative things to be able to rent out different spaces in your house and be able to generate money that way without having to purchase a multifamily, which can be a little bit more expensive.
Right. So it's an easier barrier of entry, even if it's just a single family home. if you similarly have just a garage space, an attic space, maybe a basement, you can also just use that as like a self-storage unit, give people an opportunity to store items there for this or for that, whether it's just unique, whether it's antiques, but just being able to give people that opportunity, all of a sudden you find yourself with another revenue generating stream.
Yep.
Okay, noted, noted. That's definitely a gem right there. So now going back to the tenants, you mentioned that the first tenant is a coworker that you previously worked with, and then you were able to use your garage as the second, basically getting your second tenant. And what was the development from there, and how were you able to find your next tenant?
Yeah, so after that, he eventually moved out, and I decided, I think it was during the time where I think it was around April time. And so I figured that I could try and rent out to interns over the summertime because, again, location, right? You're not too far from the train station. You can just hop on express line and you're in downtown. So I started posting on Facebook Marketplace and I attracted a couple interns who happened to have some internships in Chicago and then on the opposite side towards the suburbs. So it was really a key location right there. And so they stayed over the summertime and then I filled it up again with just other long-term tenants eventually. And I found those through Facebook Marketplace as well. I just create a posting and then just have it on there and eventually somebody would reach out and then I would do my whole vetting process at that time.
So there's another note there between Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace, you can always find activity for renters. And we talked about that personally, where it's like whether it's knickknacks you need around the house, Facebook Marketplace is a good place to initially start your search, see what the community has to say, and then you can spread a wider net essentially. So,
yeah. And I've seen, I have done a little bit of the Zillow and I think the Turbo Tenant where you just post on there and then they send it off to different platforms. I've been trying that lately now, and I do like that as well.
okay. You mentioned when you initially got those interns that after your first experience with the first couple tenants, you kind of had a new process or an improved process. What were some of those I'd say early changes or early avenues where you started to mix things up, try to have a more refined system in place?
I think it's important to be able to kind of try different things because I wasn't sure exactly where I was going with my first home. And
Right.
so I tried different avenues and really saw what fits me and what my goals are. So eventually I came about, okay, well, I'm going to move to the basement and then I'm going to rent the upstairs because it provides more value and people like being on the first floor. And I don't mind being in the basement. So I started remodeling slowly throughout the years because from the revenue that I was getting from the rentals, I started using that money to be able to put it back into the house and be able to increase the value of it. So that's kind of where I was dabbling all over the place.
Okay. So yeah, and so that means that the first tenant was initially in the basement, but once he moved out, then you had the idea, okay, let me go into the basement, do a little bit of remodeling, make it basically a much more increase the income the property is able to generate because once you give them that top floor, you give them all that open space, then all of a sudden you can get more value from it, but also it gives you a chance to kind of give the house the touch up that it usually needs. Because we know a lot of times landlords are just like, oh, it's fine, it's making money, then it's working like it should. But you had the foresight that no, it's always about being able to keep it up, being able to improve the features, being able to then give yourself a chance at a higher reward as the ROI continues to grow.
Exactly. And I wanted to build more privacy as well. So in the beginning, even though he lived in the basement, we kind of had a lot more shared space. He had to come up for the kitchen. When I started remodeling the downstairs, I put in a kitchenette down there and I started creating more privacy. And I think that really helped because overall, the house could be rented two different spots. So you could rent out the basement and the upstairs, or it would be something for a large family where maybe they had the game room downstairs and there's more activities down there and there's like a wet bar while still having the upper floor living space as well. So I was thinking outside the box because I'm like, if I ever do need to sell this property, who is my end buyer at the end of the day?
Gotcha. So as you started the remodel, you basically started thinking about what the exit strategy is. It's like, what does it look like by the time you want to get out of this, whether it's to sell it, whether it's just continue renting and then move out. But now, as you look at that next step, you're trying to envision, okay, who am I designing this for? Who am I putting it together for? And what sort of end goal am I looking to get out of this? And so you saw as you started to make those changes, being able to create some separation initially, whether it's an investor coming into a house that just as you started, or if it's just a single family that wants to come in, take this on as their own living space, then they're able to have that uniformity of, okay, they have an in-law suite in the basement, or maybe they can treat it like an ADU, or they can just have it as a whole family unit and let the kids and teenagers live in the basement. But they know now that it can give them the sort of separation to be able to live exclusively there. So it kind of just gives you variation of possibilities to what's possible and giving you a lot of different avenues as far as the exit strategies go, which shows a lot of creativity on your part. So I want to ask, how were you able to design and put that together and kind of make those changes?
I love using online programs. So I've been using one called Homestyler, and it pretty much has a 3D version where you can put everything together. And then it also has the blueprint style of design. And so I started building that out and kind of trying to figure out how everything was going to fit together, because I wanted to add an extra 2 bedrooms downstairs and be able to make it feel like a bigger space downstairs, especially when the upstairs wasn't that big. It was less than 1,000 square feet. So when I started building that out, I printed out all the plans and I showed the contractors what I wanted to do. And that's kind of where we started building out everything that I had in mind.
Gotcha. You mentioned working with contractors there, and as someone who has been in the industry too, I understood very clearly and seen firsthand the headaches that can come working with contractors in any capacity, whether you're working hands-on, whether you're hands-off, you always somehow they find a way to make it more challenging than you feel it has to be. So I want to ask, what was your experience like working with contractors in that first property?
It was very difficult. I have to say that. I have to say that I was very naive, first of all. I didn't know anything about electrical, plumbing, remodeling, or what was correct and what was not. So I couldn't really vet contractors to know if they were cutting corners or they also didn't know what they were doing. And so that kind of hurt me a bit, because I was paying all this money and some of the stuff would not work or it break. And sometimes I'd have contractors where I'd pay them and then they wouldn't show up, or things would get delayed. And so I had to kind of build out expectations over time. And I have to say that this was one of my hardest lessons that I had to battle. And it took a lot of practice to learn how to be able to work with contractors and making sure that you're finding the right contractor. And sometimes you have to start with the smaller projects to kind of see and test the waters on how they're capable of the project and are they communicating and making sure that they're getting the work done properly.
So it's basically that kind of just the inexperience in itself kind of showed when you got into it and you suddenly noticed, okay, it's not just about them coming in and doing their job. It's also about being able to manage them, then being able to manage the resources, and then them being able to follow along, whether it's a timeline, whether it's the scope of work, but just being able to know that they're competent and capable in doing the job. Because if you leave it to them, they're going to work at their own pace, maybe misuse of resources, and you start to realize you're falling behind. And then it falls on you as a homeowner who's then coming out of pockets trying to pay your way through the challenges that you see on a daily basis.
Correct. Yeah.
Yep. Understand how that can be a challenge. So I want to now ask, moving on from that and then trying to develop a structure around working with not just the tenants now, but with contractors, what sort of systems and how did you or were you able to work around that as you kind of basically learn from that first experience?
Yeah, so now the way that I vet my contractors is different. For example, one of my mentors actually suggested that I go to one of the home improvement stores right when it opens and see who's in the parking lot. Because if they're right there at the crack of dawn and they're trying to get their projects done and order materials and everything, those are the people that you want on your corner, people who are ready and are go-getters. So I would just get their phone numbers and I'd be like, hey, I'd go up to them in
Right
the
there.
parking lot and just be like, can I get your information? And at the same time, you can also find subcontractors there, and they may have other people and other connections where they do weekend work and they may charge a little bit less. And it's really about using the network and connecting with other people in different spaces. So the other thing that I also recommend when I'm vetting is to again start with the small projects, see how they do. And if that's something that's a relationship that you want to continue, I suggest you take very good care of those contractors, because what happens in the space is sometimes investors screw over contractors and they're very worried and they don't want to work with them anymore. And it's kind of like, oh, well, who's going to pay or who's going to do the work first? And it's that battle of not trusting one another. But when you find a good contractor, take good care of them, make sure that you pay on time and that you're available when they need assistance. And over time, you'll build that relationship and they'll want to keep working with you. And that's super valuable, especially when you start growing and having more projects.
Yeah. Okay. So being able to kind of, like you mentioned, first of all, thinking outside the box in sense of going to Home Depot, locations like that, that's something unique that most people wouldn't think of. So that's one way at least to kind of get ahead of the curve. Find those workers who are basically showing their hand, is showing how capable they are by being those outliers that are there, ready to bust their ass at the crack of dawn, but then also being able to then foster the relationships as you grow, giving them little projects, keeping an eye on what's the development, how well they do it, and then incrementally kind of raising the scope of work that you do with them, but then also in that personal relationship as well. You mentioned taking care of them. That's something, and as someone in the real estate industry, we notice time and time again, people are shady. People are people. You see their true nature come around time and time again when they want to do all they can to cut corners or maybe just make project more profitable for themselves. So somebody else falls at the short end of the stick in that situation. And a lot of the time, it could be contractors, but it could be the contractors trying to cut corners and then the homeowners or the investors are the ones. So it's being able to manage and have the relationships where everyone takes care of each other to make it mutually beneficial. So that way you can come around and say, okay, this is a project I'm proud of, and this is a team I'm proud to work with, or you look forward to working with again.
Exactly. And the other thing that I have to say from what I've noticed is making sure that you are connecting with contractors that really understand investors, because what I used to run into, which was a huge problem at my first house, was I was always hiring contractors who worked with homeowners. Homeowners tend to spend more money on contractors because they don't really run the numbers like investors do. So they may hear a quote and they're like, okay, well, it is what it is. We'll get it done. When a contractor works with investors, they start to understand, okay, this is the budget that we have. This is kind of like the overflow budget that we have. And how can we make things up to code and up to standard to be able to help the investor generate money as well. So that is also important because you see a different mindset with those types of contractors.
Noted, noted. That's a very key differentiator right there. Like you mentioned, those ones are just like, here's the bottom line, here's the codes, and they're like, sure, go make it work, go do the job. But with an investor, you similarly have a different mindset to just a regular homeowner. So you similarly want people who are working in the same vein on properties who think differently just as you do when approaching the project as well. So that's a key nugget right there. And I want to ask, you previously mentioned like working with real estate associations with finding contractors. I want to basically learn a little bit. Can you tell us about that experience from the associations, what that is like, whether it's with finding contractors or with working with mentors previously, like you mentioned?
Yeah, so I am part of a few RIAs, so real estate associations, and you can find a lot of them at your local, in your local city or community. And so there we have about 3 of them in this area. So I try to attend all of them. And what's really nice about that is you get kind of like the veterans, the people who've been doing it for like 30 years, and they are landlords or investors or contractors, and they all share tips and who to use and who do they recommend. And you get to network, which is awesome because now you're finding the key people that you need so you can accomplish your investment strategies as well. And then the other thing is just being able to find mentors in that space is also key. You also end up finding out about other nationwide events that are occurring. Same thing with real estate, like learning how to invest, learning how to run your numbers, or any legislation changes, anything like that. That's key for those organizations. You want to be in that so that way you can keep up with the knowledge and the changes that are happening in your community and just nationwide as well.
That's key. That's key. Like you said, in real estate, there's a lot of change that happens very frequently, quarter on quarter, you're going to hear new changes, new laws. So being able to stay ahead of it, whether it is through situations like this or keeping those connections going, I know that's very important. Now, speaking of those connections that you make there, I want to ask, you've mentioned a lot about the impact and the advice mentors have given you. What are some key, let's say, guides or maybe some pathways they put you on that's kind of helped you as you've continued to grow in the space?
One of my mentors, he did a really good job of really instilling, building out a personal vision and a business vision. Because a lot of times what happens is people go into the real estate space and you ask them, okay, why are you doing this? And they're like, oh, I just want to make money. And that's great, but you want to make money for what? What are you trying to accomplish in your personal life to be able to achieve and live comfortably? And that's different for everybody. And I really sat down and focused on my personal vision, because then I realized I've been in different avenues of real estate and doing all these other projects outside of real estate as well, thinking that I was going to get to my goal faster if I dabbled in a million things, not really realizing that it's just causing more confusion and chaos in my life. When you have your personal vision, you know exactly what to laser focus in, and you just put your head down and you start working in that area until you get to the point that you can focus on something else. So that was really eye-opening, because I was just all over the place, and now I'm more focused, and now I'm actually getting things done and doing them correctly versus everything just being half done and just a mess, honestly.
So basically, kind of put that vision in your head about maybe just streamlining what you're personally looking to achieve and then what the business wants to achieve. So that way you have those two paths and you can align them concurrently as opposed to looking three different ways, because you're always going to hear there's so many different avenues in real estate that you can make work. You can wholesale, you can do fix and flips, you can do long-term holds, you can do short-term rentals. And so as opposed to maybe looking at every different avenue, trying bits and pieces of it, they're able to help you focus on what do you want out of this? How do you think you can get some value in this? Where's that growth path for you? And then you're able to take that, align that with your business goal, and all of a sudden you have a clearer picture of what it is you want to accomplish. And it basically takes a little bit of the weight off of you, maybe trying to do this, that, and the third. But now you know exactly where to focus your energy and your mental capacity on, and you just basically start to see a flourish instead.
Exactly, because yeah, you take your personal vision and then that goes into your business vision. Because a lot of times what happens is people may get too focused into the business, and now they've just been all around the business and the business becomes their life, and then they don't realize what kind of goals that they actually want to accomplish. Where you can see people who are very successful in the business space, but they're not truly happy with where their life is going. So that's why it's key to always have that personal vision and always have it somewhere and keep it in mind, because you don't want to lose track of where you're trying to go.
Hear that, hear that. That's key. Don't lose track of where you're trying to go. Because you get lost in the sauce once you get into real estate. It's like, oh, I can do this. Oh, I can do that. Oh, this is an opportunity to do this.
Right.
All of a sudden, you're just adrift at sea. No land basis, no directional path as to where you want to go. You're just there floating in the abyss. So that's very key. That's very key. So now, armed with that knowledge, armed with that focus, you moved on and got your second property. So can you tell us what was that like? Basically, what made you pick this particular property and how did you get into it?
Yeah, so I decided to get a condo for my second property. It was in a high rise in downtown Chicago. And kind of what happened was I was house hacking the first home, and one of my tenants was like, hey, I want to actually go ahead and rent the entire house. We are a growing blended family and we just want the entire space. And I'm like, well, I don't have an issue with that. Where am I going to go next? And at that time, it was COVID. So a lot of people were moving out of the city and into the suburbs. And I figured, okay, if everybody is getting out of the city, I want to go into the city, because people are selling, there's more things on the market in the city. So I'm going to take advantage of that. So I started searching for a condo because I was a little bit tired of dealing with the contractor situation and just the amount of work that that house needed. I just wanted something that had less of the mechanicals, like I didn't have to worry about the roof or the furnace or anything like that. So I started my search and ended up finding It was like an estate sale. It was a condo with a lake view, and it had been sitting on the market for 90 days, I think. And it was nasty. Like, it was so stinky and it was gross. Nothing had been cleaned. And I was like, this is perfect. I want to make an offer on this thing.
I love it. Amazing.
So I'm like, it's cosmetic. I've already dealt with a headache of fixing all the mechanicals in a house. I'm like, this is a piece of cake. So I'm like, I'm going to go ahead and purchase this. So that's kind of where that journey started for sure.
Gotcha. Those last couple statements usually on the line where you're like, it's stinky, it's smelly, it's terrible. Homeowner, that's a disaster. Walk away. Investor, I love it. Let's go. So that's
Right.
exactly to the different mindsets you have in those two situations and scenarios. Now, I want you to please kind of tell us, so what was it like when you first moved into this little amazing Lakeview property, as you mentioned?
So because I had to be out of the other house, I was like, I don't have a place to really stay except this condo. So I decided to just get my mattress and put it on the floor in the kitchen because that was the only place that was saved of the nasty carpet. And I was there for like 2.5 weeks on the floor, just sleeping in the kitchen at the same time that I was putting in the work, the sweat equity, just fixing up the what I could in the condo.
I just gotta ask, when you start your path of basically living the American dream as an investor, and you get to this point, how do you feel? How does that basically kind of come together? Basically, like trying to get a full picture of where you are mentally, being like, this is the journey I want to take on, but right now I'm going to be sleeping on the floor in the kitchen.
It's hilarious because now hearing the story, I'm like, wow, I really did that. But you know what? It gave me like a sense of pride and like grind because I'm like, this is what I want to get done. And I'm going to figure out every possible way to get it done. So I think that was the mindset that I had back then. I was like, yeah, it kind of sucks to like sleep on the floor and stuff. But at the end of the day, I have that vision and I know where this condo is going to be at once I'm done with it. And I think that's what kept me motivated.
That speaks so key to the conversation you had with your mentor, understanding what the vision is, understanding where you want to be at the end of the road, not just, hey, I just want the money because I couldn't do this and this now, just because I want to live this lifestyle now. It's about where are you hoping to go? Where do you want to take this? Where is that journey going to lead you? So in those moments, like you mentioned, it gives you that extra push. It gives you that motivation, gives you that burst that, okay, sure, I'm in the kitchen now, but I know exactly where I'm going to take this. I know how I can transform this. And so that holds you through because not everybody's going to be like, oh, let me get a condo and I'm just going to sleep on the floor while I fix the rest of it. Unless you have that mentality that you want to do something serious, that you want to do something different here, that's what kind of gets you into that scenario. And I got to commend you for that because that's not something you hear every day. It's not everyone that wants to do this, that wants to do the work, that's willing to take that kind of a gamble, that's willing to take that kind of a chance.
Yeah, thank you. And I have to give credit to my parents because talking with my mom, I mean, I didn't really realize it as a kid what was happening around me, but she told me all the stories where same thing. They lived in a fire damaged house because that was all they could afford and they started fixing it all up. And I was like, wow, I get it from my parents because I'm like, I'm here sleeping on the floor and doing this work. And I'm going to do what I need to do to get this thing done.
Absolutely right. So it's basically like the baton again. Another moment of passing on the baton. It's like you have your horror stories of what the grind as an investor can be like, of putting in the work from day one, not just being like, oh, this is a ready, turnkey, ready property. No, this is something you have to start from the ground up by yourself, do a little sweat equity, and then incrementally you can now kind of grow into it. So tell us a little bit about that. Once you've gotten in, you've done your hard time on the floor, put a little sweat equity. How did you then take it on from there?
Yeah, so I needed to hire a contractor to get some of the major things done. So I needed all the floor replaced. And once that was done, then I was able to kind of move in. And over the course of 2 years, I just pretty much did a live and flip. I was just taking my time and finishing everything off over time as I was working at the same time. And then eventually it came to a point where I could sell or rent the condo.
All right. Thank you for joining us. Welcome back from that commercial break. Prior to that, we're kind of talking about you're telling us a little bit about the progression of your second apartment, yes, the condo. So you spoke about how first you moved in, You were putting in the grind, showing your determination by being laid out for 2 weeks in the kitchen floor, putting in some sweat equity. And then as you basically go through all that work, then you started to look at contractors and started to kind of get some professionals to come in, do some work on the place. So can you kind of take it from there and tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my vetting started to change because now I understood how to work a little bit more with contractors. So I needed contractors for the larger part of the project, which was really the flooring. I wasn't comfortable doing that. And so I'd hire them for that. Most of the condo was actually in pretty good shape. Like, for example, when I was shopping for this property, I wanted to make sure that the kitchen looked outdated, but it was in a way where I could still use the existing cabinets. So what I did was I started painting all the cabinets, I changed the hardware, and then I upgraded the appliances. And that actually made the kitchen look like way more modern than what it was without having to tear out everything. Because my goal was to make sure how much could be saved and all of the outdated stuff can just go. And a lot of the walls had wallpaper, so I took down all of that. The carpet definitely had to go because it was just disgusting. But overall, just with those changes and paint made a world of difference in that space. It was just amazing.
That's a very unique perspective, something that looks outdated but isn't, and then you kind of go in there, put your personal touch to it, give it a whole new lease on life, essentially. That's quite a take. That's another gem right there. So now I want to kind of move in from that. When similar to that, kind of like as you mentioned now that you're looking for it, you're looking for that specific kind of, I say specific property of the property. What were some of maybe the exit strategies that you were looking at as you're going into the property that kind of made you or helped you make the decision to purchase?
Yeah, so a lot of condo buildings have strict guidelines in what can be done. And so when I was shopping for a condo, I wanted to make sure that I would get a condo where I don't have restrictions on renting. So this property, I needed to live in the property for 2 years before I could rent it out. And so I'm like, that's fine because I need a place to live anyway. And I don't mind living in an unfinished space. So I could work on the property for 2 years. And then after that, I could decide whether to rent it or to sell it. Because what happens with condos sometimes is they can sit a lot longer than single family homes on the market. And so I always wanted to make sure that I had a second exit strategy, which was to rent it out. And once the 2 years came about, that's when I decided which way I wanted to go. What kind of happened throughout this time period was the building itself was not keeping up with the maintenance that it was supposed to do. And we're talking about like large scale projects, like all the windows had to be replaced. And this was I think about like a 30 floor condo high rise. So it was like very,
Windows,
very tall.
the durable amount, yeah.
Yeah. And I think they had to get a roof done and all that kind of stuff. So they had like a 5 year timeline to get this done. They were not able to hit that goal. And what happened was that actually affected the financing that you could get in that condo building for conventional loans. And that meant that if you wanted to sell a condo there, you would have to sell it to somebody who was willing to pay cash for it. So now your buyer pool is less. And at the same time, because they had to do all these improvements, they also had to do special assessments because they didn't have enough money. And a special assessment is an extra additional amount that you have to pay on top of your regular monthly assessment towards capital projects. And in this case, there was a boiler that broke and it was like a $1.2 million boiler, and depending on the square footage of your condo, that determined like how much you had to pay. And so for mine it was like $4,000 on top of my assessment that was climbing up. And at that point, renting the condo was no longer going to make financial sense. I was not going to cash flow. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to have to sell it. Now we run into this issue where I can only find cash buyers because that's all that's allowed. So it really put me in a pickle. I didn't realize this was going to happen. And it was something that I really learned with a condo building because I had no clue when I was in a single family home. So those are things that you want to keep in mind. Also, if there's too many rentals in the building. That can also affect financing. So that's something to look out for as well. So, what was my exit strategy? I needed to sell. I had to sell it. And from there, I decided to do what you call, it's like a flat rate realtor. And so pretty much you pay a fee so that way somebody can put it on the MLS and you get all the exposure. And that was going to be able to help me sell the property because I did not have enough of a margin for a profit because I wasn't ready to sell at that point. And that was kind of like my only route to get out of it. So that's kind of how
Gotcha.
I ended up doing it. And then ended up finding a cash buyer for it.
Yeah, so initially you'd come in with just a typical idea of being able to refurbish it, get it into a rental, or maybe turn it into, like you mentioned, just a natural model unit so somebody could come in, short-term rentals or maybe a long-term rental. But then as the building kind of underwent this several situations from the assessment to the boiler needing to be fixed up, you're now starting to realize that, okay, all of a sudden some of the options that you initially had were sort of thinned down. And you look at your margins, look at what's the most profitable and what's the most reasonable end goal for you. And then you start to become adaptable to the situation and start to readjust. Okay, based on this assessment, it's only this kind of buyer. And now based on this issue, the financial constraints are lessened. And now you kind of have to work on a different avenue or in a different sort of way out. And somewhere in there, you mentioned that you were kind of working, when we spoke off camera, that you're working with one of the neighbors where you had a lease option agreement in tow. And can you speak a little bit about that? What was your plan initially in that situation and how did that turn out?
Yeah, so while I was doing my live and flip, I started connecting with my next door neighbor. She didn't live in the unit, but she was a landlord and she had been renting it out for many years. But I stumbled upon her and we kind of started chatting and she told me that she wanted to retire and she needed to start selling her properties. And this was one that she wanted to sell. And if I was interested in purchasing it. So for one, I was able to have a connection and build with somebody to get an off-market lead, which is helpful because that brings down the price a little bit. So when we started talking, I was like, I am not ready to purchase right now because I was in my live and flip about a year in and I still needed a little bit more money to be able to save for the down payment to get a conventional loan in hers. And I told her the situation and I told her, hey, we could do a lease option, which is I can go ahead and manage that unit, be able to place a tenant. I take care of everything. And I'm making the payment towards you because I'm interested in purchasing this after, I think it was like a year. So that worked for her because she didn't want to keep self-managing. She was exhausted. She's pretty much a tired landlord. And this was perfect because she didn't have to deal with it. So we worked out a contract with our attorneys. And what's nice about a lease option is after that lease option term ends, I can decide whether I want to continue purchasing the property or if I want to walk away. That's the part of the option.
Yep.
And once that year hit, that's when I could no longer rent the other condo and this whole not everybody's eligible for a loan in this building. That's where all that chaos happened. And it was so good that I did a lease option because first of all, I solved her problem for the year. Like I bought her another year of not having to worry about tenants or managing or anything. And at the same time, I was able to see what was really happening with that building and what can happen in a condo. So that was eye-opening because I was not locked in forever with two condos. And I was still able to generate a little bit of money from that lease option as well.
There are a couple of things you touched on there that are really key. One thing is kind of a recurring thing, like what we're calling basically the silver tsunami, where you see a lot of baby boomers who are retiring from the industry, whether in corporate America or in this case, real estate. There's a lot of business opportunity there where, just like you mentioned, they're tired, they've been doing this for years, maybe even decades in some situations. And so now they're looking to offload their business. And the second key thing there is the fact that because this was off market, you mentioned it comes at a lower price than if you had found it on maybe the MLS or you had found it through an agent. So those two are hand in hand now. So all of a sudden make this a much more key scenario because one, you're not only leveraging just the property itself, but you're leveraging their experience, their information, their insights. And then at the same time, you're able to now add on to that with bringing your insights, your expertise, the work you've put into it as managing a landlord who's more hands-on, who's more active. And all of a sudden, you have, like you mentioned, a more profitable property that's beneficial, not just for you, but also for the older landlord, which seems to be a recurring theme now, being able to create those mutually beneficial situations for everyone involved, so that way everyone walks away from the situation as happy as possible. And then the last option there, or the last situation there, is the option in the lease option, like you mentioned. Things don't always go the way you want, but being able to know exactly how you can get out in a case where maybe things turn sour, whether it's by your doing or just by virtue of the property all of a sudden finding some functional obsolescence. And now you realize, okay, this isn't something I can carry on. Now you just have to let it go. It's starting to wear down, and it's going to wear on not just you, but your profits and your ability to move on. So now you start to see a different picture. You start to see, okay, as good as it was for that year, unfortunately, you can't go on. And so you exercise your option. And now, at least for that period, you're able to give some value to her, generate some value for yourself, take that experience, and now you're able to move on into the next situation.
Exactly.
Oh, that's good. It's quite an experience. I'd say there's a lot of ups and downs in there, from being on the floor to being able to remodel it, from being able to take it up there. And then the building itself now has its own nosedive, but then you're able to at least still get that cash buyer, find that value in it. So that I'll say it's a whirlwind of an experience for a condo, but it seems like at least you're able to walk out smiling and taking your experience, your head held high too, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And a good thing is that I was able to profit. And at the same time, again, it went back to location. I have to say, I have to give a lot of credit because it was actually close to one of the major universities, and a lot of
University is
international
that.
students with parents who had money to be able to purchase cash were actually the ones who were interested in my unit. And it was perfect because, again, once they're done graduating, maybe they want to stay in the area, but at the same time, they can also rent if that's what they wanted to do later on.
Gotcha. So location, 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 time and time again comes up trump.
Yep.
That's definitely key. I think that's the one of the biggest things you can always find beyond just what the property looks like, beyond just the aesthetics that you're looking for. Always being able to attach it to one enterprise or the other, one business or the other, or like I mentioned earlier with the train station, you're able to at least see some roundabout value that you can add to it too. And I'm sure being a Lakeview property didn't hurt either.
Right. Yep. Pretty much when I listed it on the market, I started getting offers right away. So it really helps with the view and everything. I mean, it was a great spot.
That's wonderful. No, that's quite a journey, I'd say, from being just a homeowner to all of a sudden being selling out condos and the lakefronts. So it was quite a growth you had in such a short time span too.
Yeah, definitely.
It's amazing. It's amazing. So with that, I think that's kind of a really, I'd say, beautiful and well-encompassing story for what your journey has been like for, and this I think is a great start. So just the first episode, getting to know you and understanding your journey. So I want to say, is there any last words you have, any wisdom, insights, or anything about your experience you'd want to share as we wrap up this first episode?
Yeah, I think I want to share that don't be afraid to start dabbling into real estate, kind of find people in your corner, like mentors or other people who've been doing it for a long time. A lot of people in the space want to share information. They don't want you to run into the same problems that they ran into. And so start talking to others and start connecting, because I think that's going to be the most valuable thing when it comes to stepping into the real estate space. Because in the beginning, I didn't have mentors, and I really wish that I did, because I would have avoided a lot of the problems that I experienced firsthand.
Kind of did a little bit of trial by fire, and then you suddenly start to get your feet under you, and now you have that support system as well as your own experience to go along with it.
Exactly.
Of course, yeah, see that. No, thank you so much. Appreciate your time, your insights, and looking forward to getting you back on the next episodes. Until then, thank you and take care.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Bye.
Bye.